I just want to say too, I think everyone walking this planet has some codependency in them. And if they say they don't, they just haven't acknowledged it yet.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Bruce, South Florida divorce attorney, and I have the absolute pleasure today of being joined by Suquoya Tyler. Suquoya is a LMHC. She has an office in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. She services clients across the state of Florida virtually, and I had the unique opportunity to watch Suquoya give a presentation about a month ago on women's empowerment and navigating life changes, and that fits so well together with Suquoya's main practice areas, which are codependency, dealing with self-esteem issues and trauma and anxiety. And I was really excited when she agreed to come on today and talk about codependency and navigating codependency. It's something that I see a lot of women struggle with. It can hold them back in their relationships and just being happy and healthy people. So Suquoya, thank you so much for coming on, and maybe tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, and we'll get into it here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and talk to you and talk about codependency. So I've been a clinician for almost 10 years now. Next year will be 10 years, which when I say is like, say it out loud is crazy, but it's been almost 10 years. And I've had the pleasure of working in various settings and populations. So I've worked with kiddos and adults who struggle with symptoms of trauma, struggle with codependency, self-esteem, anxiety, depression. I've worked in like treatment settings. I've worked in group home settings. I've worked in jail settings. So I've kind of been all over the board with who I work with, but there's not really anything I haven't heard or seen in my career. So I've been very blessed and fortunate to work with just lots of people. I've also gone through my own therapy. I always think it's important for like people to know that therapists go to therapy. Because we're humans too, and we put our pants on the same way everyone else does, right? So I've been a client, still am a client sometimes, and big advocate for this work. So that's me in a nutshell, as far as clinical work.
Awesome. And thank you again for being part of this. And it was really cool to watch the presentation you did to a room full of people, I guess 2 months ago now. Let's get into the topic, understanding codependency. And I mean, and maybe even some of my attorneys kind of misunderstand what codependency actually means sometimes. So if you don't mind, Suquoya, maybe take us through what is codependency and how can somebody recognize if maybe they're dealing with it?
So I always describe codependency, it's just kind of like placing anyone's needs, values, worth above your own. And that can take on like various forms. There's no like cookie cutter way. So I always just say, if you feel like you're doing something you don't want to do, or if you're holding back because you're afraid to rock the boat with someone else, or just different, it looks different, but basically putting the needs, wants, and worth of someone else over your own. That's kind of what codependency is. So yeah.
So, and I guess just as a follow-up on that, like I've heard people joke like, hey, I really like being with my spouse. We're inseparable, usually in a like I love my husband or wife kind of way. Is that codependency, or are we talking about something a little bit different?
So it's funny. I had a client actually just talk to me about this. Like she was telling me how she and her partner are joint at the hip, like they do everything together. Like when they have a day of separation, they are like their attitudes change, like they kind of interact different. And so I think that if you find yourself attached at the hip, that's probably a codependent relationship, because the goal of relationships is to be interdependent, right? Like, so that means I love hanging out with you. I can spend time with you and it's great. and I can be by myself. I can do my own thing. I can have a girls' night. You can have a guys' night, right? Like we can also function as two individuals, right? If you find yourself feeling like anxious or constantly worried or preoccupied with thoughts about your partner when you guys are separated, it's probably a telltale sign that you are codependent.
Gotcha. That clears that up. So
Mhm.
for people who are codependent, why is it a problem? How does it affect somebody?
That's a good question. So I think it's a problem. I just want to say too, I think everyone walking this planet has some codependency in them. And if they say they don't, they just haven't acknowledged it yet. So I think codependency can be an issue because of what it is. You're placing someone's needs and values and worth over your own. And so you are not honoring how you feel, you're not honoring what you want to do, and you are not being authentic. You're not being real. You're not being who you are. And I think personally, the goal in life is to live happy and authentic, right? And have true happiness, not external happiness, but like happiness from within. And I don't think you can achieve that if you're putting the worth of someone else over you, right? Because then you're not filling your own cup up. You're too busy filling everybody else's cup.
That makes a lot of sense. I just heard my son the other day talking about, I guess in schools they talk about filling up each other's buckets, but filling up their own, and it kind of sounds like maybe that's a little bit of what you're talking about here.
Mhm. Yeah, because if you're not
So
good, no one else is good, right? Like you can't, no one around you can be good if you're not good, right? Like how can you pour into other people's cups or buckets if yours is empty?
So where does this come from? How does codependency develop in somebody?
I would say usually in trauma, some type of trauma you experience. And I think that at the root of it all, at the root of all codependency is like a negative core belief, which is a deeply held belief that we develop usually in childhood or when we experience some type of trauma. And the two most common negative core beliefs are I don't matter and I'm not good enough. And if you're operating in the world with these two core beliefs, one, both, whatever, um, then you constantly have this like need to matter, right? Or be good enough. And so you are constantly seeking like external things or trying to be this person that maybe you're really not, to dispel those beliefs. And really, the only way you can is by looking inside and challenging those beliefs. But I think a lot of times people experience trauma and it alters how they view the world and it alters how they function with people because they're looking at people and the world through the lens of their core belief. So if you have this, I don't matter belief, then you probably are going to be maybe be avoidant in a relationship. I think a lot of times people think like if you're codependent you're anxious, but you can also be avoidant and codependent, right? Because you pull away and it's almost like you have this need for like your partner to be like, well, what's wrong, and try to figure out what's going on. So the long answer that I just gave is essentially trauma is, I think, the biggest cause of like codependency.
For somebody who's listening to this and they're thinking, hey, maybe I'm checking some of the boxes here. I might be codependent and I don't like the way that is affecting my life. And they want to try to break free from some of that. Do you have any advice on what those people might try to start doing?
So the best way to combat codependency, and it's a word that we hear, I think, often, especially nowadays, but it's a lot easier said than done. And that word is boundaries, right? Like having boundaries. And boundaries are like limits or guidelines that people put in place to protect themselves, but also to contain themselves, right? So you're not imposing your beliefs or your wants or needs onto someone else, but you're also keeping some space in between you and other people so that you can protect yourself. Um, So boundaries, saying no, right? Letting your no's be no's and your yays be yays, being assertive, right? Having really assertive, effective communication, not being too passive or aggressive, but just being very direct with your boundaries and like holding firm on those boundaries, right? So like saying no and like letting that no be no. So boundaries, 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 boundaries.
Do people who might have some of the codependent traits, is self-esteem an issue with them also?
I would definitely say so. I think if you're willing to place the needs and value and worth of someone else over your own, to me, that probably means that you are struggling with your own worth and needs and values, which to me equates to like a lower self-esteem.
It's one of the things, just the trends I see in my law practice with, people who are in usually difficult relationships that might have some of these codependent type traits. Ultimately, at least my impression is they feel like they don't deserve to be treated a certain way, which I mean, for me, it's sad to see. Everybody has should be happy and feel that they deserve to be happy. But maybe for those types of people that don't think maybe they deserve to be treated well, do you have any advice for them on how they might start working to change that belief?
Well, one, I would say go to therapy.
Yes, number
Go to
one.
therapy. Yes, go to therapy. I think that it's something that you have to unpack, like how you got there. I think in order to fix something, you got to understand where the problem lies. And so I think you got to go to therapy. You got to unpack your trauma. You got to challenge your beliefs and your views and your perception. And you have to give yourself permission to challenge those things, permission to change your mentality. I think a lot of us get like really stuck in seeing things one way because that's just the way it's been. And that's what I'm used to. That's what's familiar. And I think you really have to give yourself permission to change your mindset, change your mentality, challenge your beliefs. I think honestly, though, it's really difficult to challenge or to improve your self-esteem, I think, without understanding where your self-esteem became low. So I think therapy, honestly, I think go to therapy, unpack your trauma, unpack the things you've been through, unlearn certain habits and certain ways of thinking and relearn new ways of thinking and relearn ways of looking at yourself, you know?
I mean, and maybe you could shed some light on this. I know therapy can be kind of like a divorce. It can be a little different for everyone, but are we like talking about a 10-year odyssey to start making progress on yourself here? Or how long does it take to
Absolutely not.
start?
Absolutely not. It doesn't take a 10-year odyssey. Honestly, it takes however long you allow it to take. So some people come in and hit the ground running. They're like, I can't live like this anymore. I need to change. And they are willing and open to try anything I throw at them. Like they're like, throw it at me. I'll try it. I'm willing to try it. Other people, I think, are a little bit more resistant. They're a little bit more hesitant to try new things. It's uncomfortable. They're still a little iffy, which is fine. But I think that prolongs the process because part of the work is opening yourself up and, surrendering to the therapy process, and which means allowing your therapist to guide you and lead you and show you new things and teach you new things and you being willing to implement them, right? But if we're spending time getting you to a point to open up to try new things, that's going to take a little bit longer than the person that's coming in and it's like, whatever you want to do, I'll do it. Like just help me.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, that's what I tell our clients. Some people, I think the views are starting to change, in this day and age, but I think some people think, oh, it's going to take like a year before I make any progress. I was like, no, if you go get results-driven therapist and you're motivated and you do your homework, which is probably half the battle, you're going to probably see some real gains very quickly. So that's
Absolutely.
hear that. Now today, I've heard that there's different groups for certain types of people who are looking to kind of make life changes. For people with codependent traits, is group therapy a thing or not so much?
Yeah, there's actually a group, it's CODA, which I think it's been a while since I've researched it, but it's Codependency Anonymous, if I
Really?
remember
Okay.
correct. Um, I think, yeah, there's CODA groups that you can research online. You can do virtual groups, or in some areas, depending on where you are, there are in-person options. I think they're mostly virtual, but there are groups like centered around codependency for sure.
Right.
And I
And
think they're good. I actually, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
oh yeah,
um, but I think group is good. And because I think that, when you're in therapy, you have your therapist telling you all this stuff. But when you're in a group, you not only have a therapist, but you also have peers that, are there to call things out or challenge you or relate to you. So I think group therapy is a wonderful option for individuals that are struggling with codependency.
and I guess random question here. It's kind of maybe not on the script, but I've always seen when I see people that in my law practice, I'm a divorce lawyer. I think, as you're aware, a lot of our clients are kind of associate with being married, usually to a husband that doesn't treat them right. Sometimes they're a narcissist, maybe they're just a difficult person. So like when I see a lot of people in my world that I would maybe say are checking some of the codependent trait boxes. Usually their husband is somebody to divorce at the end of the day, at least in my mind. But if somebody's listening to this and they're identifying maybe they're in the codependent side of the ledger, so to speak. Does that mean that it's their partner that's causing the issues, or can it just be maybe something individual to the person and they're in an otherwise healthy marriage?
Hmm. So, meaning like, is the partner causing the codependency?
Yeah, yeah, because I don't want people to listen to this and think, oh, it's all my husband's fault, and have a marriage that could otherwise, be improved, come apart.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a really great question. And I think people might not like the answer, but no, it's not a partner issue. It's a you issue. It's something that not to say the partner doesn't contribute, right? I think that's definitely a contributing factor, your partner and your partner's personality and what they bring into the relationship. But I definitely think that codependency is an individual issue that has to be worked on, right? Because I mean, think about it. If you are, I don't know, constantly willing to take on the burden of your husband financially, right? You started doing that, right? So now when your husband is like, I'm not doing it, you've been doing it, right? Like, that's not a partner thing. You
Yeah,
have been doing it, right? You kind of set the scene for this. And right, it might not have been something you actually wanted to do. Maybe you agreed to it to, like, I don't know, make him be quiet or make, stabilize the relationship, whatever reason you decided to do it. That was your decision, right? So like that was your decision to be codependent in that moment. Um, and so that's something you have to work on.
it's interesting. Yeah, that popped into my head as we're going through this, because I usually see it as, okay, well, the person's married to a monster. Sometimes, I mean, it's just the people I meet they're like, it's a small pool. Like, they're usually people that have marital issues. I know that there's other people that are different in the world, but that I like what you're saying. I mean, to me, that part is probably something I'm gonna be a little bit more proactive in telling our clients, like, hey, yeah, this is the relationship, but you gotta work on yourself here, and that's how you're going to get the improvement in the life going forward. So that's pretty cool. Thanks for taking the off the script question there.
Yeah,
um,
no worries.
so for maybe somebody that's listening to this and they're like, hey, Sequoia is talking about my sister or my daughter, and they're a family, a loved one, maybe a girlfriend, and they want to try to be as supportive as possible and helping that other person who might be codependent make some positive life changes. Do you have any advice for them on how to broach that issue and be as helpful as they can?
Yeah, so I would say first encourage them to go to therapy.
Yeah.
Encourage them to go to therapy because it's super helpful. I would also say encourage them to hold their boundaries and call them out respectfully, lovingly, caringly when they are not honoring those boundaries. I think it's very easy for us to kind of slip back into old habits. And so having accountability, having someone there to be like, hey, Sequoia, you said no. Like, remember, like we're holding boundaries here, so your no needs to be a no, and that's it. Just kind of holding people accountable, your loved ones accountable for what they want and what they say they're working on. And not being afraid to call them out, not being afraid to point out when they are slipping back into old patterns. I think that's probably the best thing that you can do for them is help hold them accountable, and encourage them to go to therapy and just be supportive. Just be supportive, give them some grace. They're not going to be perfect. No one's perfect, and we all like, slip back into old habits. I definitely do, even as a therapist. So I think be supportive, give them grace, but don't be afraid to call them out and be assertive and hold them accountable.
People who are codependent and they're realizing this at a point where maybe they're also realizing it's the end of their marriage and they might be going through a divorce from a difficult person. Do you have any advice for those people as they approach the divorce and then maybe get into one with what might be some still present codependent traits?
I would say, I know I keep saying therapy, but therapy, therapy, therapy.
I'd
I
say that would be do it all before. That's my best advice, but I was curious what you would say.
yeah, I think being in therapy for sure, even as you approach the possible divorce, is important. I think also being gentle with yourself, like you're already going through a hard time. And I think we get caught in this loop of thinking where it's like really negative. And we're talking to ourselves internally really negative, and we're not really treating ourselves the best. So I would just say, outside of going to therapy and doing your work and really understanding and learning yourself, give yourself some grace. It's not an easy thing to get a divorce. It's not, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to do everything right. So, be nice to yourself. Be nice to yourself and go to therapy. That's probably the two most important things I think you can do.
And we've a lot of I think really awesome stuff we've covered here. And do you have any other advice for somebody that's listening to this and saying, "Hey"?
I would say, that's a good question. What would I say? I would say, again, be nice to yourself and give yourself grace. I would say this too shall pass, right? Like nothing lasts forever. And you might be in a storm right now, but it's not going to last forever. You will get through it if you want to get through it, right? Like if you want to do something, you will do it. So I think, give yourself time, give yourself grace, pour all the energy and effort into yourself and learning yourself and challenging all of those negative beliefs, unlearning some of those maladaptive behaviors like codependency.
Sequoia, before we go, if you could just tell everybody, how do they get in touch with you? How do they go through possibly becoming your client so that they can reach out if they'd like to?
So you can reach out to me via email. That's probably the easiest. So I have a group practice that I work with, and I also have my own solo practice. So with the group practice, the email is my first name. So Sequoia at Caring Therapists, S at the end. Therapist has an S at the end. It's plural, of Broward.com. It's super long. I'm it's just one of those things. So it's Suquoya at caringtherapistofbroward.com. You can also go on caringtherapistofbroward.com on the website, and you'll find the information to get in touch with the office. So the phone number and the office email. That's also a good way to get in contact. I would encourage clients who like have insurance to go that route. For those that don't necessarily want to use insurance, then I usually send them to my solo practice, which is Authentically You Counseling and Wellness. And so that email is my first name again, Suquoya at authenticallyyoucounseling.com. And the
Perfect. And we'll
U
have
in the email is an actual letter U, not YOU. That's important to note.
awesome. And for everybody watching, we'll have this in the show notes, the podcast, the YouTube, and social media descriptions. So it's all right there. Well, Sequoia, thank you so much for being part of this. I've gotten to see you speak now twice. I encourage anybody who might have anything in the realm of codependency, trauma, or just working on self-esteem, being a happier person, to reach out to Sequoia. She knows what she's talking about, and it's just awesome to be around you. So thank you for being part of this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. If you ever need me to come back, I'm happy to. I appreciate the work you and Ashley do. So I'm always here if you need me.